Johannes Loubser is an expert on rock art site treatment and management plans and so forth. Unfortunately, he is not able to join us in person today, but he did send a video. So let's take a listen.
Hi, with this presentation I'd like to talk about the importance of doing management and conservation actions in a practical and sequential order. This plea is based on personal training and hands-on experience in the management and conservation of rock imagery in Southern Africa, Australia, mainland America, Mesoamerica, the Caribbean, South America and Hawaii, dating back 33 years. Based on the flowchart generated by Sharon Sullivan and Nicholas Stanley Price from the Getty Conservation Institute in the early 1990s, the management and conservation of places with rock imagery should be viewed as a process. First, among many other things, the flowchart shows that all facets of conservation and management are interconnected. Secondly, the flowchart shows that proactive management has priority over corrective conservation actions, such as graffiti mitigation. Thirdly, the flowchart shows that the management and conservation of sites is a process. Fourthly, the flowchart recognizes that no two sites are the same. And in addition, the flowchart facilitates the recording and addressing of unique features and issues at each site. So it doesn't account, there's no blanket explanation or solution for all sites. They're very particular. And then the flowchart acts as a mnemonic checklist to ensure that all aspects of concerning management and conservation at any site are addressed so that nothing is left out. And then finally, the flowchart hints at the importance of doing management conservation actions in a correct sequence. Ideally, management and conservation actions at a site should proceed in a certain order to prevent putting the proverbial cart before the horse. Implementing proactive management practices before reactive conservation ones not only minimizes natural deterioration and vandalism, but also saves money over the long term and better preserves the integrity of a site. So what you can see here in this list is to first consult all stakeholders, but also throughout the process of doing conservation or management and conservation. And then an important step is to document the physical condition of the rock art surface and the surrounding terrain. And then thirdly, record all images and graffiti in addition to the surface and the terrain so that one's got a good idea of what is there. And then implement infrastructural changes. Importantly, remove the trails and vehicle access further away, and where necessary install psychological barriers, and then only then remove and or camouflage graffiti where necessary and with the permission of stakeholders, and then install the explanatory signs where necessary to explain what has been done at the site and also to educate visitors. And then finally, regularly monitor the site, and that allows one then to perhaps return and tweak the system and do modifications where it's necessary. These points are discussed in greater detail in the rest of the presentation. First, prioritize the consultation with all stakeholders, as already mentioned, both at the beginning and throughout the management and conservation of a place with rock imagery. Primary stakeholders regarding Native American rock imagery should be representatives from relevant Native American groups. I use the term rock imagery instead of rock art here to refer to Native American petroglyphs and pictographs instead of rock art, in recognition that many Native Americans prefer not to use the term rock art. It should also be noted that Native Americans normally view the place where rock images occur as important, if not more important than the rock art imagery. So the management and conservation of place and the surrounding landscape are often as important as the management and conservation of a panel with rock imagery. This implies including the overall terrain, animals, plants, water sources, and geological features, plus acoustic and olfactory or the smell properties of a place. In terms of assessing the physical integrity of a place, it is important to closely examine and document the physical condition of the rock images, its rock surface support, and any relevant physical features and living things in the surrounding terrain. In this photo, a tree is growing on top of a rock, and its roots penetrating through the roof, coming through the ceiling of the rock shelter with pictographs. This root has loosened pre-existing cracks in the ceiling, posing a potential danger for visitors if it collapses. Dated photos such as this also act as a datum reference point against which future monitoring of the site's condition can be done. In addition to the focus on the site only, it is important to examine surface water flow down the slopes above the shelter to assess any influences from that direction, for example. Physical condition assessment forms like this one helps collect information on panel and motif location within a site, its aspect, topography, texture, anomalies such as cracks and holes, microorganisms, animal and insect activity, water sources, crust, skins, color signs of vandalism, and overlap sequences between motifs and natural features, or including the succession of natural features on other natural features on the rock surface. So not only look at the things themselves, but the sequence of things to kind of create a history of damage at the site. Visual documentation is critical, recording images, the natural features and signs of vandalism such as graffiti. Distinguishing them, but also make sure that you record all of it. Thorough recording allows for the creation of thumbnail inventory of motifs plus overlap sequences. Assessing the overlap sequence of graffiti applications can also be helpful. So if you have an inventory, you have kind of a baseline for future comparison where you can see through comparison if some of the motifs are lost, and then also the superpositioning can tell you about the relationship between images and graffiti. List of recorded graffiti names, initials, place names, dates, and drawings help assess the management history of a site. Frequency of graffiti dates, for example, can help reconstruct the effectiveness of changing management practices regarding visitation to a site. This example is from the Scenic Mountain petroglyph site in western Texas, and it shows that during the private ownership by Mr. Edwards, people visited there and did a lot of graffiti, and then once the state park, the Texas State Park's been fully fledged and fully implemented in the area in the 1930s, how graffiti then drops. And it also shows that increasing population numbers don't always necessarily correlate with the increase in graffiti. So effective management helps control the incidences of graffiti. Through recording or thorough recording it is important to consult with Native Americans and Euro-Americans before graffiti removal and or camouflage. This is important because even recent graffiti, that is, those less than 50 years old, might be important and should be left alone, whereas some old graffiti, that is, those older than 50 years, might be considered offensive, inappropriate, and undesirable, and is best removed. In terms of scheduling or ordering of actions at protected sites, it is vitally important that all access roads, parking lots, and foot traffic trails be removed some distance away from the rock surfaces with imagery before the graffiti removal and or camouflage takes place. Perhaps the most critical point in this presentation to take into consideration is that waiting to create physical barriers, distance between visitors and rock imagery panels only after graffiti removal has almost invariably resulted in more graffiti being added in the interim period between removal and creating the buffer. Moreover, repeated observation through the years at a variety of sites in different parts of the world have shown that rock surfaces within arm's reach from footpaths are far more likely to get vandalized than those further away, or those separated by a psychological barrier of one kind or another. So this is the central point of this presentation, is that always do the infrastructural changes before you do the graffiti removal, because if you remove the graffiti and then wait to do the infrastructural changes, the interim period, usually damage does occur. So put in the protection and the interpretation before you do the removal. For example, take the incident at Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, where Jane Colber and Dabney Ford had psychological road barriers installed between the visitor foot trails and the petroglyph panels. No new graffiti occurrences have been observed on the surfaces behind the road barrier, except in a few places where a barrier is within arm's reach of the cliff face or boulder surface. So, once graffiti was removed and or camouflaged on surfaces behind a rope fence, they tend to remain clean. Reversible psychological barriers with interpretive signage comes in various shapes, materials and size. It is found that a barrier, if it is found that a barrier does not work, for example, then it can be removed without leaving significant traces or changes to the ground surface. In addition to interpretive signage, such as those in Cherokee Celebrity at Judicula Rock, Western North Carolina, well-maintained barriers are physical signs of custodial care, the site's importance, and also its educational value. Only once access routes have been moved sufficiently far away from the rock surface and the necessary barrier and interpretive signs have been installed can graffiti mitigation proceed. That is, following consultation with all stakeholders. Graffiti removal and or camouflage should strive for minimal intervention, using soft and dry materials before resorting to hard and wet ones. Also, camouflage, all other things being equal, should be the last resort. Also the use of solvents. Recommended verbiage that should accompany barriers at sites open to the public include: 1. A call for help to protect a Native American site that empowers the visitor to please help protect as a sacred Native American place by staying on the path. That, rather than a negative commandment, it is a plea for assistance to be proactive and also create an understanding of the importance of the place. And then secondly, where there are names, signatures and dates on rock, is that were not removed, there should be a sign that because that graffiti is there, or that writing and dates and or signatures or initials are there, visitors then aren't entitled to follow suit. When following a bureaucratic 50-year rule which stipulates that all graffiti 50 years or older should be left alone, it should be made very clear to visitors why the graffiti has been left intact. Reasons such as important historical figures or people intricately tied to the place should be spelled out in the sign. However, it is highly recommended, instead of an arbitrary 50-year rule, decisions should be made by all concerned stakeholders what should be removed and what should remain intact. So in that second bottom sign, that is just a proposal. I'm sure people can think of better verbiage than that. But something like that should be used to explain why certain names, signatures, dates, initials have been left intact. And the reasons are numerous, but usually valid. And then lastly, reminiscent of management and maintaining built structures, for example, taking care and fixing problems at sites with rock imagery is an ongoing and never-ending process. This not only implies that the site stewards and motion detection monitor visitation and damage at sites, but also that specialist input is required when changes in management or help with graffiti removal are required. So one cannot say that just because you've removed graffiti or you installed some protective barriers and interpretive signage beforehand, that a site can then go on autopilot. There's always some sort of human presence and follow-up needed. Thanks for viewing this presentation, and please feel free to contact me, Johannes Loubser, at Stratum Unlimited if you have any questions.